Chapter 1. Why does Europe have to turn to buy American weapons for Ukraine? As early as 2022, when Russia began its special military campaign in Ukraine, Europe entered a historic turning point. From a continent accustomed to peace, where war was only in textbooks, they now have to face a major conflict right on their eastern border. At first, Europe was hesitant. Should they provide weapons aid to Ukraine or not? Some countries, such as Germany, France, or Italy, were criticized by public opinion as slow and half-hearted. But over time, the war became more and more fierce. Russia stepped up its attacks in Donbass, Kharkiv, and southern Ukraine. The question was no longer, will there be aid, but how much aid, what kind of aid, and will it be enough for Ukraine to stand firm? However, what surprised observers was that instead of relying on the European defense industry itself, which is considered one of the strongest and most traditional industries, the European Union began to change direction, buying a large amount of weapons from the United States to transfer to Kyiv. So why? 1. The European defense industry is out of breath. Take Germany, for example. Germany has the Rheinmetall Corporation, which specializes in producing the famous Leopard tank. The Leopard 2 tank was once considered the pride of Europe. But when it came to aid to Ukraine, it turned out that the Leopard stockpile was not large. The Leopards sent to Kyiv were quickly severely damaged on the battlefield, causing great controversy. Is the Leopard legend just an illusion? Similarly, France has the Leclerc tank, the UK has the Challenger, Italy has some self-propelled artillery lines, but the quantity is small, and the new production capacity is slow. While Ukraine needs thousands of weapons, Europe can only provide dozens or a few hundred. As a result, Europe is forced to look to the US, which has a huge defense industry producing weapons like cars. The US is both an arsenal and a security guarantor. Since World War II, Europe has been too accustomed to relying on the US through NATO. It is no exaggeration to say that many European countries have almost outsourced their security to Washington. Now, when the Russia-Ukraine conflict breaks out, Europe needs the US even more. The US has systems like HIMARS, Patriot, Abrams, F-16, and most importantly, uninterrupted supply. If Ukraine loses a tank battalion, the US can provide more within a few months. Meanwhile, if a Leopard battalion is lost, Rheinmetall will have to spend 1 to 2 years to produce more. Humorous example. Many defense commentators joke that Europeans fight each other, but have to run to the US to buy ammunition, like playing soccer and running out of shoes, having to borrow shoes from a bigger neighbor. Political factor. Both providing aid and avoiding a collision with Russia. Some European countries, especially France and Germany, are reluctant to confront Russia directly. If they accelerate the production and provision of made-in-Europe weapons, Russia may consider this an act of direct aggression. But if it goes through the US, that is, buying weapons from Washington and sending them to Ukraine, then more political responsibility falls on the US, while Europe plays the role of middleman. This is a clever political move, both helping Ukraine get weapons and minimizing the risk that Moscow will consider Berlin or Paris as direct opponents. Economic problem. America benefits, Europe loses money, and has more risks. According to data, in the first half of 2025 alone, European countries spent tens of billions of euros to buy American weapons. This turned the US into the world's #1 defense contractor. But for Europeans, they began to ask, why is their tax money not used to strengthen the European defense industry, but instead flowing into the pockets of American corporations like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, etc.? An analyst in Brussels said sourly, "We are nurturing the American defense industry while the European defense industry is gradually shrinking." However, for European leaders, the immediate priority is to keep Ukraine from collapsing. Because if Kyiv falls, the wave of refugees and security threats will spread to Berlin, Paris, Warsaw. In a house-on-fire situation, people often choose to buy the nearest fire extinguisher, and that fire extinguisher is labeled "Made in the USA." End of Chapter 1. Europe buys American weapons for Ukraine not because they don't have the capacity, but because they are caught between many factors: weak defense industry, political pressure, urgent battlefield needs, and the habit of depending on Washington. This sets the stage for a new game in global security policy when Europe wants to be independent but cannot leave the giant shadow of the United States. Chapter 2: Political and Military Calculations Behind the Transatlantic Arms Deal. On the surface, Europe's joint purchase of U.S. weapons for Ukraine is simply a matter of supporting allies in the context of a tense war. But when peeling back the layers, we will see that behind it is a complex political and military chessboard in which each country has its own calculations, and sometimes those calculations do not completely coincide. First of all, it is necessary to affirm one thing: Europe does not lack weapons. Since the Cold War, many countries such as Germany, France, and the UK have invested heavily in the defense industry. The French have Leclerc tanks, Caesar artillery systems. The Germans have Leopard 2 and PZH-2000 artillery. The British own Challenger 2 Stormer air defense missiles, but why do they now have to cross the Atlantic to order from Washington? The answer lies in three factors: speed, standardization, and politics. First, speed. In a protracted and attritional war like Ukraine, the speed of replenishing weapons directly determines the pace of the battlefield. European defense corporations often have limited production lines, and many types of weapons are still stuck in administrative and political procedures in the export process. In contrast, American giants such as Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Dynamics have huge production capacity and global logistics networks. Jokingly, if war is considered a cross-continental pub, then the U.S. is the only chef who can fry, stir-fry, and bring out thousands of hot plates of weapons to serve immediately. Second, standardization. The current Ukrainian army is a strange mix: old Soviet artillery, Polish tanks, Turkish drones, German rifles. Logistics synchronization is a nightmare. American weapons, which are standardized by NATO, help to reduce the mixed pot situation to some extent. A HIMARS gun or a Patriot system is not only a combat tool, but also a key connecting Ukraine to the Western military infrastructure. Third, politics. This is the main dish at the party. When Europe buys American weapons to aid Ukraine, Washington not only sells goods, but also tightens the ties between the two sides of the Atlantic. Instead of each country supporting itself in its own way, now all flows must go through the U.S. gate. Figuratively speaking, the U.S. is both a toll station and a service provider, while Europe, despite its wealth, still has to wait in line to buy tickets. A concrete example can be seen in the fighter jet deal. While France tries to promote the Rafale, Germany and Spain want to promote the Eurofighter project, Ukraine ultimately aims at the U.S. F-16. Not because the F-16 is an unrivaled super product, but simply because spare parts, training, logistics are all available from NATO. Once Ukraine operates the F-16, Kyiv has planted an American flag right in the formation on its defense map. Therefore, we can say this transatlantic arms deal is not just a transaction, but a reshaping of power relations within NATO and throughout Europe. Chapter 3: Meaning, Consequences, and Unanswered Questions. After analyzing the causes, let's now look at the consequences. Will Europe spending billions of dollars to buy American weapons for Ukraine really resolve the war situation, or is it just a short-term doping dose? First of all, on the military side, the batches of American weapons will certainly help Ukraine have more defense and counterattack capabilities. From anti-aircraft missile systems to smart artillery shells, they will put considerable pressure on the Donetsk, Kharkov, and Zaporizhia fronts. But, as many experts warn, weapons are not a magic wand. Ukraine may be strengthened, but without a reasonable strategy, the difference on the battlefield will be local and short-term. Politically, this decision sends a strong message. Europe, despite its internal divisions, has chosen to stand in solidarity with the U.S. in defending Kyiv. But the question is, how long will this solidarity last?
Many countries in the European Union are facing inflation, energy crises, and pressure from voters. As arms bills continue to swell, will governments have the patience to pay? Economically, this is clearly good news for U.S. defense corporations. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman will continue to grab gold in the crisis. On the contrary, many European companies feel marginalized right at home. At a press conference, a French parliamentarian once sarcastically said, "We are using the tax money of the people of Paris to feed workers in Texas." This sentence reflects the growing dissatisfaction within the European Union. In terms of historical significance, this could be a turning point. Since the Cold War, NATO has never been so connected and interdependent. Ukraine has inadvertently become the new pivot, turning the entire European security system in the direction of Americanization. If the war ends, the question will be, can Europe escape from the shadow of Washington, or will it continue to live under the protection of the superpower across the Atlantic? Finally, we must mention an indispensable element: the bitter humor of history. People often joke that in every war, America may not directly win, but American weapons will definitely win. From Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, until now, Ukraine, the U.S. defense industry has always found a way to turn smoke and fire into lucrative contracts. And this time, Europe is the customer who voluntarily signed the bill. Conclusion: the map of power and the choices of history. In short, Europe's move to start buying U.S. weapons for Ukraine is not just a simple military move, but a strategic turning point that can reshape transatlantic relations. It shows Europe's growing dependence on Washington, reflects complex political calculations within NATO, and raises a series of questions about the sustainability of this solidarity. Are American artillery, planes, and missiles enough to turn the tide on the battlefield? Or is this just a temporary solution, and the long-term situation will still depend on the political will and economic endurance of both Europe and Ukraine? Looking at the bigger picture, history once again reminds us that every war is not just a contest between armies, but a bargaining between great powers, where every bullet, every cannon bears the mark of politics and interests. And that is what makes this story the focus of global attention. If you find this analysis useful, interesting, and helps you better understand what is happening in the Ukraine war, as well as the broader picture of history, please like, share the video, and subscribe to the History and War channel to continue accompanying us to explore the mysteries and lessons from wars around the world.